All right. Well, welcome everybody to this event tonight. Interview with Brian Lewis. So, I mean, we had seen Brian's book being advertised a bit on and promoted on social media. So we just letting some people in to the meeting. Yeah. So we got a chatting with Brian, and we thought, hey, let's this might be something people might be interested in. We think there should be a nice mix of architects and photographers and some other people who might be interested in hearing about this book. So so we set this up tonight, and we hope everyone enjoys it. So for those who don't know me, I am Chad Luchoy. I am the president of the Photographic Society. And I also have here one of our other members, our program manager, Sarita Ramprasad. And so let's jump into it. Let me give you a short introduction to Brian for those of you who may not actually know too much about Brian. Brian attended the Architectural Association in London, qualifying as an architect in 1970. Brian's career as an architect spanned 5 decades, during which he photographed the work of his firm. During his career, Brian has served as president of the Trinidad and Tobago Institute, president of Joint Consultative Council of Trinidad and Tobago, member of the Interim National Physical Planning Commission, director of Urban Development Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago, director of the local chapter of Transparency International, member of Citizens for Conservation, member of the National Trust, member of the Trinidad and Tobago Art Society, and a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Photographic Society. Brian's interest in photography began when he was 12 years of age, when Sir Norman Parkinson showed an interest in his photographic eye. Over the years, his photographic interest merged with his professional career, and he specialized in architectural photography and landscapes. Brian attended many photographic workshops, including Nick Merrick, Jeff Totaro, Stephen Brook, Tim Griffith, Sean Conboy, Peter Lauber, David Osborne, and Charlie Waite. Brian has an extensive library of architectural photography, which he has had published in local and international publications. Brian has been responsible for the 2 publications, Mannequin, the Art and Architecture of Anthony C. Lewis, and Contemporary Caribbean Architecture. So tonight's talk, we'll have it as an interview style. People feel free to jump in and send your questions to the chat. And then if we have time at the end, we'll open up the mics to if anybody has any questions for Brian. All right, so let's get going. Brian, you're in the hot seat.
Good evening.
Let me pull up my list of questions here.
Well, first thing I'd like to thank the association for inviting me to this interview. I hope it goes well. But, and also to mention that the reason why my bio included a few of the comments it did is because I taught myself photography, and that meant having to go away on many occasions to get specialized training. And also my library, that's how I learned, from reading and traveling and attending workshops. But anyway, continue with your questions.
So yeah. I guess the biggest and the most obvious question is, for Spain an architectural record. Why this topic? What's the purpose of this book? Who is it aimed at? Why this now?
Okay, well, when I was working with my firm before, we used to publish a book every 5 years to commemorate the firm's existence, survival, And this was, we had come up with the idea of this book for its 75th anniversary. So I started photographing Port of Spain. It took 3-4 years to do, walking through all the streets of the city to photograph. And as I went along, I decided not only to do the historical vernacular type of architecture, but what I call worthwhile new contributions to the city. Because you can't present the city just as a bunch of old buildings, or historic buildings, because it's not really like that. This is supposed to be like a snapshot of the city in 2020 or thereabouts. And maybe in decades to come, it might be useful to go back and see what survives, because we have a propensity to remove the better buildings that we have, and thereby lose our historical contact with the past, you know. So I wanted to really preserve that. That was my intention. But apart from the photographs, there are also a number of articles by well-known persons, architects and other conservationists, to give the book a sense of gravitas as well. So it's not just photographs, although that's the majority, that's my contribution to the book. But there are also a number of articles by other specialists and so on that will be interesting. Yeah.
Good. I'm especially looking forward to the some of the articles as we had spoken a little bit about earlier on.
What sort of articles would they be, though?
Yeah, well, the authors are Rudin Roberts, who is a well-known conservationist, Gary Turton, who is writing about East Port of Spain, which will be interesting.
Who is here tonight? Hi, Gary.
Then there's Jeffrey McLean, who has written a very, very nice article about the city with beautiful images, I must say, Casabons and things of that sort. And there was also an author of a previous book on Port of Spain, and I can't pronounce the person's name, but Stephen Stumfley or something like that. He's a Canadian that wrote a book on Port of Spain, and he has a little article, as well as Margaret McDowell, who is the chairman of the National Trust, and of course Gregory Abode from Doma. So we're getting quite a wide range of commentaries on the city, which will, I think, will be something to look back on, I think. Yeah. So I'm very thankful to all of them for coming and supporting. They're supporting the city, you know, and to preserving it and going in the right direction in the future.
Yeah, it's important that as we see things happening around the city. One of the things that obviously jumps out is there are literally thousands of buildings in Port of Spain. How did you decide which buildings, you know, you want to photograph and make it into the book? And I mean, what was the process in your mind?
Process, yeah, the process. Well, you know, I've been an architect for over 50 years, you know, so it's rather difficult to explain that, you know. I'd have to explain what architecture is about and so on, but I think we all know what the historic buildings are. So, but it's the modern buildings that we probably are inquiring about. And there are not too many good ones either, you know, which is not saying a lot, but I felt that those which, in my opinion, and you know, you may disagree, you know, this book doesn't include every building in Port of Spain, it does not include every historic building or every new building. It's the buildings that it's my book. You know, if you want to show different buildings, you do your own book.
So what are some of the criteria you had in your mind to choose buildings to include then?
Well, you know, I don't know how to answer that question. You know, something that is well designed, that makes a contribution to the city, that is well built and well designed. There are not too many of them, you know, to be frank with you. But I don't know how else to explain it.
Yes, this is a very subjective selection based on your context and the way you see the buildings. Yeah.
And I dare say there will be some who will disagree. I have left out one or two buildings purposely, and you know, but they're kind of personal to me, those decisions, you know, and I don't apologize for that. You know?
What was the parameter of Port of Spain that you were working within?
Well, it starts, let's say, on the east in Belmont. It's actually pretty close to the fine city of Port of Spain. So it includes Belmont, downtown, uptown, Newtown, St. Clair, Bucarapo, St. James, north and south, right up to the end of St. James. That's the defined boundary of Port of Spain at the moment. You know. It's a little hazy in one or two areas like St. Clair as to whether it really goes to Long Circular Road or not, but I'm not really too bothered about that.
What?
And did you shoot, was that Chad?
No, go ahead.
Did you shoot new images for the book, or did you also dip into your archives for them?
No, I would say 99% of the images are all new. Yeah, they're all new. I mean, I have done one or two pictures of like the central bank and so on before, but I didn't use them actually. So very, very few archival buildings, all within the last 4 or 5 years.
You had any challenges shooting them?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Did you care to share?
Let me just see. I have one. Challenges shooting them. Well, of course, walking around with a Hasselblad is not the most
Inconspicuous thing you could do.
One might say it's a hassle.
It's a bit of a hassle, yes, very good. And of course, so it makes you very conscious of your surroundings. But I'm pleased to say that, you know, having walked through the entire city, nobody ever troubled me in that whole time. I mean, kind of crazy thing for me to do. But and it's not just the camera. I mean, it's setting tripods down. Huh? So as soon as you set a tripod down, pretty well anywhere in the world, incidentally, everybody's antennas go up as if you're doing something wrong. You know, you drop a tripod in front of Napa, and all the guards come out to move you. You know, and so on. So it wasn't easy, and having an unwieldy tripod and a precious camera, you have to be very careful with what you're doing. You know, but as I say, I didn't have any major problems at all. And of course, you have to think about lighting because not, you know, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So therefore, you photograph in a kind of structured way, you know. And of course, the sun is in the north from May until September or something like that. So, you know, you have to think, you have to use maps and think about what time you'd be photographing to get the best light on the buildings, you know. But these are not meant to be artistic photographs. These are records. So we're not talking about sunsets and all kind of fancy stuff, right?
Yeah,
it's just to capture the buildings, simple, with as little distraction as possible. And most of them are straight on, except where that was difficult.
Any now some challenges, any interesting things happened along the way while you were photographing?
I'm trying to think. You know, not really. You get very confused in Woodbrook as to whether you're going up a one-way street or coming down. So you know, every area is quite different, actually. It's a good question. Belmont, there's absolutely nowhere to park in Belmont. So you try getting a photograph of a house or building in Belmont without a car. Very difficult. And there was some disappointments that once or twice I had to go in and ask people in the house if they could move their car and all this kind of stuff. You know, but
okay,
you know, it's very difficult in Belmont. Let me see, Woodbrook. Well, as I say, up and down streets, the one-way streets, and so on. It's very confusing. I'm using maps and making notes. You know, you drive around first of all to find out what to photograph, and then you come back and try and find what you've made notes about. You know? So I have, of course, downtown. You know, better you do that on a Sunday or something. You know, things like that. Every area had its own different characteristics. You know, St. Clair was no problem, really, you know.
I think that is one of the things that, I mean, you know, in most vibrant cities, you get that, right? Different areas have different kind of character, you know, and I mean, I wonder if, so that, does that come through in the book, you think, with the photographs?
Yes, well, in sometimes in unfortunate ways, because you're seeing a lot of cars when you shouldn't, you know, and a lot of, actually another real, couple of observations about the city, you know, really, is the amount of bloody telephone wires and so on hanging all over the place, you know. I'm not sure that most of them are actually working, but it's quite an untidy city as a result. And the other one is really billboards. Well, billboards are really an anathema in Port of Spain. I mean, some buildings seem to be almost built to provide a billboard, you know, and the building is a billboard. So, and that doesn't really contribute much, you know. I mean, so the whole commercialism, I mean, yes, people have to advertise and so on, but I mean, do you really have to destroy the buildings? Some of them are beautiful buildings, you know, old buildings and even new ones too. And they get, you know, paper plastered all over them, you know. That's not so nice, you know.
To speak to your point about the telephone wires, Mark Lindsay asked, how did you deal with the forest of overhead wires?
Very simple. Ignore them totally. I mean, it may take me 20 years to remove all those wires. No, but I think that's part of the character, you see. So well, you know, you try to avoid having it right in front of you. Or some of these balls of wires, they tend to hang up all the wires together. I mean, you obviously keep away from those situations, but you know, the wires are Port of Spain too, you know, so it's just unfortunate in a way, you know. I mean, some people would argue it's very attractive. I don't know. I don't particularly find so, especially the way that you get 2 or 3 poles hanging together. Obviously, nobody's fixing anything, you know, so it gets untidy. You know?
It's like when you go up into an old office and you see all the different generations of IT and phone infrastructure just left abandoned in the ceiling space. As you talked about Napa and the guards coming towards you when you set up your tripod. Did IP rights and property rights and those type of things come into play? Did you have to get permission to shoot any buildings or to include them in your book?
Well, not really, because I'm in the public space, you know. I'm once I'm out on the pavement, I'm okay, you know. But in the case of Napa, I did attempt to put my tripod a foot inside the property line, and apparently that was a problem, you know. But I said, like in London, it's almost impossible to drop a tripod anywhere in London because it's all the property is owned privately.
Yeah.
But in Trinidad, you know, you don't really need, once you're in the public realm, on the pavement or on the street, it's not a problem.
Even if you're shooting a private home?
Yeah. You're not shooting people inside the home. Yeah. You don't have to ask permission. I mean, it would be nice if you see the owner sitting in the porch and so on, you probably have a little chat with them and so on, you know, but you don't actually have to do that. You know? So, and sometimes when I see people, they invite me into the house and show me around. Some of them have done very nice work inside, you know, and it's very nice of them to do it. Yeah. Now, and sometimes I take photographs and give it to them as well, you know, as a thank you, you know, for some of them who have been particularly cooperative, moving their cars in Belmont, for example. My Lord.
Yeah. So the response you got from people like that was mostly positive. People were, were engaged and happy about the project. Yeah.
I can't, maybe 1 or 2 cases where somebody was kind of sitting in a porch, which I didn't really notice, but they noticed me and they felt that I shouldn't be. But it was no problem, you know, you just explain, you know, what's happening, and that's no problem at all. You know.
So Christine Norton actually has a couple questions. She asked if, as a photographer, do you think that there's enough work being done in the field of architectural photography in Trinidad and Tobago? And is there a particular gap in photography of Tobago? And do you think the use of drones would facilitate capturing architecture?
That's about 3 or 4 questions there.
If you know Christine, you wouldn't be surprised.
Can you ask me the first part of the question again?
Do you think there's enough work being done in the field of architectural photography in Trinidad and Tobago?
Right. I think that is a good question. Well, it's first of all, there are very few new buildings being built that are worthwhile photographing. That's the unfortunate truth. And there are very few, to be honest with you, I don't think anyone else has had the training that I have had. So that, it's not that people may be taking real estate photographs and so on, but architectural photography is a lot more than that. So it's a very limited field. It's very limited. To answer that part of the question, and she mentioned something about Tobago. Yeah, I completely agree with her. I haven't done anything over there at all. Sadly,
You have any plans to?
No, no, not really. No, as I mentioned before, I'm 76, so I don't want to take on too many long-term projects I can't complete. So my last book was going all up the islands, and so it was a major physical and financial effort. I mean, that kind of a book is quite difficult to do now. I can't do that anymore. So even going to Tobago with lugging expensive equipment and so on around, I don't think that Tobago has that much really architectural gems, frankly, I don't mean anything by that. I mean, the truth is we're destroying our history as we go along, And was there another question she asked?
Yeah, if you think the use of drones would help capture architecture.
Well, drones offer a different perspective, no doubt. And there's a book by a fellow coming out very shortly. I'm not giving him an ad, but what's his name here? Richard, somebody Deming or something like that. Richard Ramirez, Richard Ramirez.
Yeah, he does a lot of aerial stuff, yeah.
Yeah, he does a lot of that. Well, in architectural photography, I mean, you may be photographing architecture, and it does give you a different perspective. I would not disagree with that, but architectural photography is a lot more precise than that.
So could I ask what you mean then when you say there's a difference between architectural photography and real estate photography? Like, could you give an example of some of the differences?
Yeah, well, real estate, you have to look at what is the objective. Real estate photography is to sell the real estate. And therefore, you're not really interested necessarily in the design of the building. You're looking for the features that the customers may be interested in seeing. And usually, it implies that there's very little time, no money to photograph, an apartment or a house or whatever it is. It's a very kind of commercial approach that you'd photograph very quickly, So there's not a lot of funds involved, Architectural photography is a lot more than that. I mean, and it includes interiors, The interiors will take you at least an hour to do a photograph, to move equipment around, all the lighting and everything. It's a very specialized field, to do it properly. I mean, real estate, you could just handheld your camera and just move around quickly and take pictures, And with the cameras today, you can get pretty good pictures. It's like the difference between a Volkswagen and Rolls Royce. They both work. They both can get you there, but there's a lot more work in the Rolls Royce than in the little Volkswagen. Nothing implied against Volkswagen, of course.
I guess, yes, I guess it has a lot to do with the context and the intent of the photographs, yeah.
So that it takes a lot more time and effort and equipment to do it properly, architecture, as opposed to real estate. You know, frankly, a real estate, you know, person can just go around photographing themselves. They don't necessarily need a specialist, you know. Although they could do with some training, I could tell you that. Some of the buildings in the newspaper and so on look as if they're falling down.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Who's that, Gary?
Yeah. Hi, Chad. Hi, Brian. I was wondering, I mean, as an architect and a photographer, and when you're moving around the city, does your perceptions change? Like, let's say, did you think about photographing a building, but when you saw it, you change your mind? You're like, it like maybe it doesn't photograph well, or it's not what you thought it was, or it's not that great? Or did you conversely ever run into a building that you hadn't seen before? You realized its great potential, you know, for photography or even for design and architecture.
Yeah, well, certainly as you go around the city, I discovered a few buildings that I didn't know about, you know.
Yeah.
But, so that happens, yeah. And yeah, sometimes there's a good building that's designed, but because of the environment around it, the flagpoles and the billboards and everything else,
Yeah.
it really it won't make a good photograph, you know. So yeah, you have to be on your toes all the time, you know. There's a lot of instinct involved, which is why I found it hard to answer the question about which buildings to photograph.
Mm-hmm.
It's in my instinct, you know, it's my training, my whole life, you know.
Sure, sure.
Good question, Gary, thanks. Let's switch a little bit about, move away a little bit from the photography per se and more into the book. This is your third book, yeah, Brian?
Yeah.
Maybe tell us what are some of the challenges in getting a book like this done and created and published. And maybe if you have some advice on any photographers out there who are thinking of, you know, maybe trying to attempt this thing of publishing a book.
Yeah, it's a kind of crazy thing to do. That's what I'll tell you. I mean, where do you start? Well, you need to have a concept in mind, obviously, and it needs to be something that you're passionate about, because that is going to have to drive you for as long as it takes to make the book, maybe 3 years or whatever. And you get very nervous at the beginning because there's so many things that you just don't know about, and there are no publishers really in Trinidad. Like if you were in Los Angeles, there are publishers who would call you up and ask you to do a book, and they'd pay you in advance to start the book. You know, that doesn't happen in Trinidad. So and that makes it very difficult. So every book you do is a personal statement about what you believe in, you know, and because there's nobody backing you really. So when you start, it's like you really don't know where it's going to go. It's like doing a painting or something. You're not quite sure how it's going to all work out. There's so many challenges on the way, and it means that. But one of the things about photographers, which is a positive, is that the main contribution is is your photography. So you could, once you're convinced that it's a worthwhile project, you can go and do the photographs. Then, I mean, it costs you your time and so on, but you're not investing money and so on. You're not hiring people and so on. You go out and you do your photographs. So that makes it very easy to get started. But then you come to the reality, well, how are we going to pay for this thing? You know, is it really a worthwhile project? Are there going to be customers who will be interested in the topic that if you want to do butterflies or something, how many butterfly enthusiasts are they going to buy a book, you know? So just to be ridiculous, but you're going to be, in the end, you have to have a pragmatic view about how it's going to work, the finances and so on. So you start developing as you go along budgets and things like that based on information that you'll get as on it keeps changing. So you develop when you develop a good budget, it does give you the confidence to continue. It provides a target, and I think that I found that very, very important. So you said, in my case, in the books I am doing, I had to get sponsors to help fund the project. So it has to be a worthwhile project, as the one I'm doing now, which is about Port of Spain, which I consider to be a worthwhile project, that they would come forward and help sponsor. So we set, despite misgivings, we set targets for fundraising, and we're actually going to meet them, to my surprise. So if you have the will to go ahead and the passion, it all starts to happen. People start to believe it's going to happen, and it does happen. But you have to test the feasibility as you're going along and not be too optimistic. Let me see, I have one or two notes here about it. Let me see. And of course, it's important to produce the book efficiently and in time for sales. Meaning, in my case, I view that the corporate world, there's an added market there for Christmas gifts. In other words, banks and insurance companies and so on, and large corporations, they are looking for gifts for their customers, and producing books, something worthwhile at that time, it is an added attraction to purchase the book. So it's important to try and meet that schedule, despite all the challenges of doing that. And then you need to get, I think, design is very important to me. So I have a graphic designer. I don't want to give away her name right now, but because I want to finish my book, please. But you need to have a good graphic designer and a good printer and a good fundraising team. So I managed to have put those people together, and the fundraising team have done an amazing job in this difficult time. So, and then you have to say a few prayers, and work hard, and it will happen. It is happening.
So we expect the book out before Christmas.
Well, I'm trying hard. I mean, it's an uphill one, though. It's an uphill.
Do you have an idea of what it will cost? What you'll sell the book for, I mean?
Well, I have a range, let me put it that way. It's all to do with the amount of books you're going to print and what you think people will pay for a book, But it's somewhere around $400, give or take. But you test all the different variables to see if you can afford these things. You have to. There are a lot of variables involved.
Let's talk a little bit about the buildings and conservation. I mean, over the years we've lost, and you kind of alluded to it, we've lost some of the buildings. In Port of Spain, I know there was the buildings on Marine Square, obviously Salvatore Building, gingerbread houses in Woodbrook, Greyfriars Church, and now we're taking on the stocks. I mean, what do you think should we be doing more to preserve some of these buildings, or at least some sort of adaptive reuse or something to not completely just demolish the buildings and put up something new? What are your thoughts on
That's a good question. Well, I have to say that the present government has done a wonderful job of restoring some of our better buildings around it, like the Red House and around the Savannah and so on. I mean, they're very well done, And I think that to me actually is the best thing I think that has happened in the last in my career here. The fact that they've spent a lot of money to maintain and, well, not so much maintain, to restore I don't think they're spending enough to maintain, actually. So even though Killarney, which was really well done, I mean, when I photographed it, I saw signs of decay already, you know. I don't think enough is being spent as usual on the maintenance of these buildings. But I think, you know, I hope that my book will add to the discussion of these kind of issues. And I'm actually hoping that, just to continue this point, that when I launch the book, depending on all these variables that I'm talking about, that it may be at a kind of a gallery or something whereby we could have a number of lectures about, maybe with incorporating some of the authors of in the book on topics surrounding the topic. So it will lead as a sort of catalyst to a discussion on a topic, because I think really it needs to be ventilated, it needs to be talked about. And, you know, we don't teach art, well, much art in school in Trinidad and Tobago. I think it's quite rare. So I think there's not enough appreciation of these things. So I think the book will be part of the discourse on the subject, you know. And I mean, Rulin Roberts is writing a very important article, and also Margaret McDowell on those topics. So this is not just a picture book, although, you know, it's actually a serious book.
So to speak to that point of Charles about the historic buildings, Christine had a question. She said that you must have captured features worth noting and perhaps even keeping in terms of architectural design. How can photography tell the story of our city's architecture in order to influence the next building designs or planning policies?
Who asked that question?
Christine.
Christine.
I think we have to put you and Christine together in a room.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a deep question. I think I don't know if I'm prepared to answer that quite. I'm not a person to just stand up and talk, you know. So, but I mean, when I'm photographing the older buildings, the monuments, and so on, you're looking at all the details and everything. When I was photographing Killarney, I was shocked. Actually, it really threw me as a photographer, that building. Nothing in the building lines up. Nothing. And you'd never realize that. Sorry, my phone. Nothing in the building lines up. So it completely shattered my approach to photographing the building until I changed my thinking about it, you know. I had to photograph off axis because actually, you know, people were hanging lights off center. Everything was cockeyed in the building. And you would never think such a precise building done. I mean, it's an amazing building. That it could be so irrational on the inside, but it is. And you can't photograph it in a normal way. You have to photograph it differently. So I don't know how I got onto this topic, but anyway, you know.
Yeah. Interesting. I think we've pretty much gotten in through most of the questions that we had. We have a couple of minutes left. Would anybody like to, we'd like to invite people from the audience to ask any questions, anything we didn't cover, or anything that you'd like to
I know
point out to Brian?
Mark had a question as well.
Sure, go ahead.
He said that you've become active on Instagram. And what are your thoughts about that as an avenue for making people aware of your work and perspective compared to a book?
Well, yes, I think they're both valid, actually. I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I've been doing a lot of posting on Instagram, really to kind of stir up the interest in architecture in preparation for launching the book. I don't intend to go like this, you know, permanently. Well, there isn't enough content, really, you know, to be frank with you, to continue. But you know, it's a different kind of approach. So you could say the social media approach does add to the public education, if you like. an interest in architecture, because there's very little being done in that area in Port of Spain. You know? So, I mean, a book, the reason why I did a book in this case is because I think it's time to record it, you know, what's going on. You know, it's a snapshot, but it's hard, you know, it's not digital, it's important. I mean, tourists would be interested in walking, you know, understanding the city, and people, historians as well, I suppose, would be interested as well, and as well as architects and other persons, you know. But I think it's time to record it, so that's why I'm doing it in hard copy as well. But I must say, social media does stir up a lot of interest. I've noticed I get quite a bit of response as it were from people to my images, which I've done before. You know, these are images for books and so on I've done before, and images that I have. I'm not taking these to put on social media. These are old images, you know. So I'm seeing lights flashing in my house. What the hell is going on? All right, okay.
You're okay? I see, I think Kenny has a question.
Yeah, Brian, is there a digital book somewhere in the future after this one is published and maybe a second publishing? Will there be an ebook?
I don't know specifically about digital. I don't know how to do it, to be honest with you. I find it more difficult to do for high quality images, you know, like architecture. I find it a little more difficult. I mean, it's very easy to do books digitally for all kinds of types of books, but I haven't seen. You know, I look out for books on architecture all the time. You know, I'm always on the search for. As I say, I have a huge library, but I've only seen one book on architecture done digitally. So I don't know enough about it to make that happen. But the idea would be a lot easier than what I'm going through, to be honest with you. Although there's some value in having a piece of paper in your hand, and that'll be there for a lot longer than the digital. Digital work, everything is disappearing, you know. So there's a difference, you know. I mean, the digital world really gives tremendous options for people, for photography. Huge, you know. I mean, it has really changed dramatically in the last 20 years or so, or even less. And I really started a bit late in the game. So trying, you know, understanding Photoshop is really a mind bender. That really it took me a long time to even get the basics right. It's a crazy kind of, it's like Excel on steroids. Yeah, Photoshop, my Lord.
I've never heard it described like that, but it's a good term.
Yeah, it's an amazing program. I mean, God knows how they do it, you know. But I dare say it's all going to become easier, Kevin, as time goes on, to do digital books. And I dare say maybe I'm not as up to date on it as I ought to be. But yeah, that's where it's going to go, I'm sure. So this may be one of the last books you'll see of its kind. Who knows, you know. But I still feel there's a value in a piece of paper, sorry. And beautifully produced books are a work of art, you know, and as well, you know. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I mean, it's the same discussion you have about, you know, digital images versus a print. You know, I mean, there's some value, I think, that could be ascribed to a beautiful print as opposed to seeing it on your screen. You know, so bringing it out into the real world.
I just bought a book by an American landscape architect. Boy, what a beautiful book! Wow. And this guy, he just shoots an 8x10 film, you know. But amazing book. Wow. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Gary had a question as well. He said Trinidad has some interesting public spaces that are often not used well or maintained. Did you cover any of these spaces, i.e. parks, the promenade, waterfront, central market, etc.?
Well, I dare say those are opportunities for further study. You know, I did try to do some shots of parks, but I found it very difficult to, it gets to be very long. It's like ultra panorama. So I didn't really. I mean, that's actually sounds like a little study of its own, that you could do. Like little architectural studies almost, but photographic studies of an aspect of the city, like the waterfront, as you mentioned that, I mean, I do have a few photographs down there, but it's not done in a sort of intellectual way. It's just the buildings that are there, I think what you're getting at is that there may be some serious parts of the city that we could study with photography in the future, And I do agree,
So then all architectural photography is an intellectual exercise as well then? Yeah?
Well, yes, depending on, a lot depends on who the client is, on whether you're doing it for yourself or the client or whatever. But architectural photography takes a lot more work to do a good photograph than real estate photography, as I said before. And interiors too. Interiors are actually even more difficult. When I say they're technically more difficult, but artistically less difficult. Yeah, I'll give you something to think about. Photographing buildings can be quite, it's a lot to express in the building, the time of day and all the form and all these things. It requires a lot more, it is a lot more interpretive, whereas interior photography, there are a lot of technical issues to deal with, and minute adjustments and where things are, it's very, very tricky. I mean, take you well over an hour sometimes to do a photograph with the lighting and everything that has to be done. And then all the color saturation and contamination and everything you have to deal with. It's very tricky. But I must say, Photoshop has really provided a tool that really helps a lot. You can do, once you understand it, I'm not suggesting I do yet, but I keep trying.
You mentioned about the architectural intent. How, and I mean, I'm not an architect, so let me try to phrase this the right way. When you're taking an architectural photograph, how important is it for you to understand the architectural content? As an architect, I mean, I would imagine you would obviously have some insight, and you could look at something and maybe figure out, what was the architectural intent. But to someone who's not an architect, is it possible to, how does a non-architect do proper architectural photography? Well,
that is an interesting question. And of course, it's easy for me to say, no, you won't do it. But no, of course, everything is possible. I think as I did, I read a lot about it. I mean, I have a huge library, probably the largest library in the Western world or something on architecture, on architectural photography. And I think you need to be trained, just as it is to become an architect, you have to be trained to become an architectural photographer. You need specialized training. I have been to every single architectural photography workshop out there, everyone. And it costs a lot of money, have my own money to develop the skill that I have. Yes, it is possible for anyone to become, to design. Anybody that has a flair and an artistic ability can design as well as photograph. but you'd be limited by what you know and that is possible. You'd be limited by perhaps by the equipment that you have and the intellectual understanding of what you're looking at. So it's not to say you can't do it, you can. Some will do it better than others. And it doesn't mean that because it also doesn't mean that because one has trained to become an architectural photographer that you will do a perfect job. You know, it doesn't follow either, just to make the point. But I think that, it really depends also on the appreciation of the public as to whether you can see the difference. You know? As I come back to the Volkswagen and the Rolls Royce, you know, it really, you can't believe the fine differences involved between a bad photograph of a building and a good one. It's huge, you know? But you need a refined eye to really appreciate it, you know? So, and I don't think that there's enough general education about aesthetics in this country to stimulate. Well, and of course things are improving all the time, don't get me wrong. There are people with talents, visual talents and so on. And I don't mean to tell a photographer because he hasn't been trained that he shouldn't try to do it. But I'm just saying you will be severely limited. I mean, I would love to teach anybody who is interested, because it would be a pity to let everything I've learned die with me, you know. That's kind of sad. So coming out of this, if anybody wants to have some kind of I actually have done 1 or 2 little workshops for people, but not photographers, right? For engineers and other people like that. Perhaps some
We'll organize a workshop as soon as we can, for sure.
Yeah, definitely something we could chat about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, because whatever you learn, I mean, it will only improve what you can do, you know. And maybe there are some photographers who will do a better job than I can with lighting, which is another area, a specialized area in itself, lighting interiors. Again, Kildani was a real challenge for me with lighting. And with Photoshop as well, you know, there are photographers who are, of course, much more skilled than I would be. But I still have the knowledge of how to do it all and the training. Yeah? So I do feel that I could pass on that to whoever who's interested. And perhaps the books as well, you know.
So Simon Brown had a comment on green buildings and why we're so slow to incorporate green buildings into architecture. And Giles asked, what are the key elements that define architectural photography? And is it about accurate representation?
That's an interesting question. What is it? A lot of it depends on who the client is and, you know, what do they want, you know? I mean, it's quite wide, the interpretation of architecture photography, but you know, it's a business too. So if your client, whether it be an architect or developer or contractor or whoever, wants to photograph the building that he's designed or built, I mean, he wants it to be in a certain way, you know. And as an artist, you might see it in quite a different way, and which is not to say that you shouldn't do your own photographs too, but don't impose that on the client, obviously. It's just a professional approach, you know. So, but it's quite wide. I mean, you could shoot in black and white and very esoteric sort of images that you could hardly recognize the building if you want. That's art, eh? When you see like architectural competitions away, architectural photography competitions, the photographs are quite unrecognizable in a way. Eh? Many they're not normal photographs. You know, they're very unusual graphic sort of photographs. You know? But on the other hand, good architectural photography is to capture the building in its best light, considering who it's for as well, and presenting it in its best in its best light, you know. And because that, you see, architects need good photographs, or should need good photographs of the building, because a good photograph for an architect could lead to a lot of other work, and you know, you could make a lot of money from a good photograph, because you might get a huge project as a result of it. And I'm not joking. I think this is very serious. So it needs to be of a value, of that kind of value, that a good photograph can really get you a lot of work. I mean, I dare say our firm, the firm that I work for, ACLA Works, or ACLA Architecture now, I mean, I think I'd have to say, because of my interest in photography, you know, it has a very, very outstanding graphic look to it. And the photographs of all the buildings are very, very strong. And I don't think there's anybody even close to it in Trinidad. And I think that has really harbored well for the firm. And, you know, so you can actually argue this point in trying to get a reasonable fee. And architectural photography is not cheap, eh? Because of the equipment, the training, and everything else, and the fact that they don't come along every day, or interiors, it needs to be at a certain price level. But the point is, it can really get you. I mean, I did photographs for an interior designer whose name I won't mention, but if he's on, that won him an international award. And I'm sure that the photographs had a great deal to do with it. Of course, it designed too. But I think without the good photographs, you know, there's no hope of winning an award. So, and in North America, for example, the architectural award system there, you know, is tied very closely to architectural photography, and there are award schemes to do with that, you know. So they understand that. But in Trinidad, I don't find there's enough. That is my own personal view. Enough thought going into presenting your work properly, and using it as a means to get further work and for raising the standard of visual appreciation of the profession as well, you know. So, and I think that's something that needs to be worked on.
As you're talking there, Brian, it reminds me of an article Mandley Newton had shared with me, and I think it talked about the way architecture obviously influences architectural photography, but I think they also talked about the way architectural photography influences architecture. And I mean, to me, that was a very interesting flip. You know, you would never think that architectural photography influences architecture, but I think because there's a record, it has an influence on future design. Yeah.
And even at a lower level, that, you know, the type of lighting and so on you have in buildings, most architects don't really understand how to light their buildings properly, and even the quality lighting, you know. So, you know, there's a lot of, I mean, when you go to photograph an interior, for example, you can run into a lot of problems with lighting, different kind, especially today with LED lights, so many different color temperatures and so on and so on. You know, if people don't understand what they're doing, they're just making it more and more difficult to capture their work, you know. So, but I mean, that's a very low level I'm talking about, but formally and so on, architecture the photographer can really help the architecture a lot, you know, inform, you know.
Good. Sarita, any more questions in the chat? Sarita, you there? Oh, your mic is off.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I said no. That was pretty much it.
Good.
But your last point was pretty much what Christine asked about the photographs' influence in building design and planning policy, which is interesting because, you know, it can be the same thing.
Good. And I see Gary said he was going to raise a point on that. So good. All right. Well, I think, I mean, we're a little bit past an hour. I know some of us have to run off and go have dinner and stuff. We'd definitely like to thank everyone for coming out this evening to hear about Brian's book. We'd like to thank Brian, of course, for so generously offering his time and his knowledge and his his information. Brian, before you go, could you want to speak about maybe, I mean, we kind of touched a little bit on the price. You know, can you tell us maybe about distribution, pre-ordering, any of those kind of things about the book, anything that is in the works? If people want to donate to publish the book, I know there's some fundraising going on still. You want to talk about some of those things before we go?
All right, just to close off, well, we're still closing off the fundraising fairly soon because we're gonna start printing fairly soon as well, you know. So it's everything. I've now got all the articles today. I see Gary smiling there. The last article came in today, actually, the last 2 articles. So it's a rush now to kind of get them in shape. Sorry, I missed your question.
Sorry, no, just anything else you wanted to talk about? Like if, I mean, when you know,
Yes,
you
yes.
said, so the book will be available before Christmas. Any ideas how you would be distributing if people were interested in buying the book? You know, how would they find out about the book?
Okay, well, I'm now starting to think about having pre-ordering and so on, and I will do something along those lines. But I've just started today to make inquiries about how to do that.
So follow you on social media, I guess, would be the best way for people to keep
Well,
abreast
yeah,
of what's
well,
going on.
when the time comes, when I've got it figured out, I will bang it out there again, you know.
Okay.
So you'll start to see it again. Distribution, no, I have given no thought to that, really, because the last book I did sold out before, you know, sold out in 3 weeks, you know. And I didn't really have any to sell, you know. This time I'll have to do there'll be a lot more, but I was disappointed, for example, that the bookstores in Trinidad have not supported this, you know, but they expect to sell the book, you know. They're gonna expect to sell the book at 25, 30% of markup or whatever it is, you know? But, you know, they don't come forward. So I'm not too happy about that, but anyway. So
Yeah.
I have some favorite stores and so on. I don't know, that's another thing I'm gonna have to look at. But it will sell, I think. As I say, there will be a launch of some kind. I haven't figured that out yet. That's one step at a time, you know. Right now is the fundraising. So there'll be a launch, and I hope it will be more than just a launch of the book. It will be an event which will be educational and collaborative and so on and so on. And maybe I printed all these bloody buildings. I did a print, 500 prints, you know, letter size of all these buildings. So, I mean, they should be stuck up somewhere. I mean, take a lot of wall space, but anyway. So yeah, all of that is still to come. So it's an ongoing challenge, right? And I don't have all the answers.
All right. So you let us know. So we will definitely tell our
Thank you.
membership.
Yes, I look forward to your support, your continued support.
Great. All right.
And
So
thank you very much, all of you, for listening.
Thank you, and thank you everyone
Thank
for
you very
coming out.
much.
Thank you, Sarita, for monitoring and helping organize. Great. So all right. So we bid you good night and have a pleasant week. And thank you. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
All right.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.